Welcome back to another beginner's guide for the advent of code 2022. In this video, I provide a strategy for you, which should be approachable by anyone who has learned the basics of coding, variables, if statements, loops, and functions. If you have those under your belt, this is a great way to practice. I've done my best to provide you with time to pause the video before I reveal any of my solutions, which happen to be in C#, but you should be able to use this guide for any programming language that you want to use. And of course, if you get stuck, feel free to post a question in the comments or on the Advent of Code subreddit. Tons of people there willing to help you. And if you find this video helpful, be sure to click the like button. And if you want to see future guides, click the subscribe button. All right, let's get into it. After having successfully reorganized all of the rucksacks, the elves throw a massive party on the beach. Fun is had by all. Unfortunately, the party has left the beach in complete disarray and the boats have still not been fully unloaded. To help clear space to unload the remaining cargo, elves are assigned sections of the beach to clean. However, as the elves begin to clean, they find that some have been assigned overlapping sections. To help reduce duplicated effort, the elves decide to pair off. Unfortunately, some of the pairs have noticed that their section is fully contained in their partner's section. Can you determine how many of these pairs exist? Welcome back to day 4 of the Advent of Code 2022. I'm Captain Coder and I'm exhausted from partying with our elf friends. That said, we need to help them figure out how many elf pairings contain a redundant elf section. So this problem is similar to yesterday's problem in the sense that we can think about the elf section assignments as sets. However, in this problem, we're actually checking to see if one set is contained in the other set. And that said, we also know that this isn't a regular set. It's actually a set of continuous ranges that have a lower and an upper bound. And this allows us to write a relatively straightforward check to see if one is contained in the other. So let's talk about a strategy. The first thing we need is going to be some way to represent a range that has a lower and an upper bound. I'm going to recommend creating a type called range, which has two properties, start and end. In your programming language, you might create a class or a struct or a record. The second thing we're going to do is we need a way to parse our input into that range, keeping in mind that each range input has two entries. So if we look at our example input, each row has sort of a left range and a right range. Each one of these represents a single elf in a pairing. And then once we have that, we need a way to check if one range contains the other. So if the left range contains the right range, or if the right range contains the left range, that means that meets the criteria for our problem. Once we have those three things, a range, a way to parse it, and a way to check it, our solution becomes very, very easy. We just iterate through all of our inputs, parse in the ranges, check if it's contained, and then we increase a counter if it is, and then we finally report the result. All right, now that we have a strategy, let's see if we can execute on it. The first step is going to be to define a range type with sort of an upper and lower bound. I'm going to use start and end for mine. I'm in C#, so I'm just going to use a simple record type. I can just say that I want to have a record called range, and it has an int start and an int end, like this. Your language might have some sort of data type already built in that does this for you. Feel free to use that. If you're in a language like Java, you might have to make a class, but you need a data type available to you so you can keep your data organized. All right, at this point you should have a data structure for yourself, some way to represent a range with a lower and upper bound. The next thing we're gonna do is we need to be able to parse in some input into that data type. And in fact, we need a method or function that parses ranges because we get pairs of ranges. So I've set myself up here, I've defined my type here. Mine is gonna take in a string and produce a pair of ranges, so 2 ranges here. And I've just set it up as a default here. Right now it's just returning 2 ranges, both of which are at 0, 0. But I've written a test here so that way when I'm done implementing, it'll give me some confidence that I've implemented my parse correctly. I want to parse in 2 to 4, 6 to 8, and that should get me back 2 ranges. Right now, if I run this, it is going to give me back, you know, that my start and end ranges for both of these is essentially incorrect. So now that I have a test in place, I'm gonna go ahead and try and write an implementation for this. And then when I run my program, my test is gonna sort of give me confidence on whether or not I've parsed it correctly or not. One thing to note here is I did make a test where I'm parsing in something that's not in my example input here. I have numbers that are multiple digits. That's one thing you want to keep in mind. You don't want to parse single digit numbers because in the description itself, it lets us know that just for this example, I use single digits, but you could actually receive an integer of any size. So give it a shot. See if you can write a test for your ParseRanges method, then go ahead and implement it and use that test to give yourself confidence that it's working for your example inputs. All right, at this point, you should hopefully be running your test and seeing an output that you're happy about. In my case, my outputs are producing what I expect. Given these inputs, I produced the correct ranges. If yours doesn't do this, go back, see if you can fix it. Pause now, because I'm about to show you my solution. So here it is. I have written a helper function called ParseRange that's gonna take just either the left side or the right side and give me back a range. And then I've used that to write my ParseRanges. And the way this works is I just split on this comma, so I know my string's gonna be separated by comma, and that allows me to get 2 smaller strings, my left side and my right side, and I just call ParseRange on the smaller input, and then my ParseRange basically splits on the dash, and then I pull out the int from the left side, the int from the right side, and I return a new range with my lower and upper bound. Perfect. We are almost done now. We have one more method we need to write, which will accept 2 ranges and check if either is contained in the other. I've gone ahead, I've defined my method here, contains, which accepts 2 ranges and returns a bool. I haven't implemented it yet, but I've additionally added in a small test up here, which is gonna check some of the inputs from the example. Specifically, I've included one that will return false, and then the 2 examples that should return true. This is gonna give me confidence that it's going to work. So we wanna think about this too. For our method, we have 2 situations where we could return true if the first range contains the second range or the second range contains the first range. This is a little tricky to figure out the logic here, but if we think about breaking it down into a smaller piece, can we figure out if a single range contains another range rather than checking both? If we draw out a little picture here and think through our conditions, it can be helpful. So in this picture here that I have, what is the relationship between each range that tells us the yellow range is contained in the red range, or that the yellow range is not contained in the red range? Think it through, see if you can work out the conditional logic there, and then give it a shot. At this point, you should have a method which takes in your two ranges and tells you whether or not one is contained inside of the other. I've run my test here and I'm seeing that the expected outputs are correct for 2, 4, and 6, 8. I get false. 2 to 8 contains the range 3 to 7, so I get true. And then 4 to 6 contains the range 6 to 6, and I get true. So I have some confidence that my solution is going to work for a bigger input here. Let's look at my solution now. We have contains, and as I had stated before, we have two conditions under which this will be true. The first one is, does the first range contain the second range, and does the second range contain the first range? So we're checking if the first range here, so this condition is the start of our first range less than or equal to the start of our second, and the end of our first is greater than or equal to the end of our second. And then we need to check the other one, so if either of these are true, we return true. So the second start is less than or equal to the first start, and the second dot end is greater than or equal to the first dot end. So we're checking if one of them is contained inside the other, and if it is, we return true. Notice I did a little trick here where I didn't have to do an if statement to check these. I used Boolean logic to tie them together. All right, we're almost there. We're almost done. We have all of the pieces. We just have to put it together now. I'm gonna build a sample file here. So I'm gonna take this example input, create a sample.txt, paste that in there, and I'm gonna build a program now that reads in this file, parses the ranges, checks if for each range, if those are contained, one is contained in the other, and if so, increment a counter. Finally, you just display the result. So we're iterating through it, checking if we should increment, and then reporting the results at the end. Give it a shot. If all went well, you now have a program that tells you the number of pairs in the sample and gives you confidence that your program's gonna work on a larger input. When we run mine, it displays found 2 pairs. I'm about to show you my solution, so if you need to pause and finish your solution, go ahead and do so now. And here's my solution, very straightforward. I read all of the lines from my sample.txt. I create a counter variable to keep track of how many pairs I've found. I loop through, I use for each to iterate through all of my rows, one row at a time. I use my ParseRanges method to extract both the first and the second. And then I have a little conditional check here, if contains first, second. So if either of them contains the other, I increment by 1 using the + in C#. And then finally at the end of my iteration, at the end of my loop, I display how many pairs I found. The only thing left to do is to download our full puzzle input and pass it in and see how we did. Hopefully at this point you've submitted your solution and received a beautiful gold star. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, let me know. Click that like button. If you want to see more Advent of Code guides, click subscribe so you'll be notified when they're uploaded. And as always, have a beautiful day. Keep on coding, keep on growing, and you're welcome back anytime.